We should be okay.
Good morning or good afternoon. Welcome to this Foreman Deep Dive. The topic for today is the design for how we can go about installing Katello on an existing Foreman. So for the last couple sprints, a few of us, a small team, Eric, Lukash, and Steve, Lawrence, and myself, have gone through all of the issues that are involved in that we need to solve in order to be able to install Katello on an existing Foreman like you would a normal plugin. So if you're not familiar with the background, a couple of years ago, Katello was its own standalone project. About a year and a half ago, the developers at that time decided to make Katello a Rails engine. So basically a Foreman plugin. As part of that effort, Katello installer was created, mostly because Katello has quite a few more complicated requirements than Foreman. We have a lot of SSL certificates that are involved in securing the communications between all of the different components of Katello. We have pulp, candlepin, Elasticsearch, and a variety of other things. So this can be thought of as almost a continuation of the enginification that happened. We now need to address the technical debt that resulted from that. We need to be able to make Katello truly function like a Foreman plugin. So the goal behind this is to be able to make a user that has an existing Katello be able to a user that has an existing Foreman be able to install Katello on top of it without starting fresh. So there is a wiki page on Redmine that goes through the list of issues that we've discovered. This is based on an email that Eric sent earlier this year about all the different areas that we need to touch. So the first part of being able to install Katello on an existing Foreman is turning Katello installer from being an independent entity into a plugin into Foreman installer. So this is based on the concept of scenarios. Katello installer becomes a plugin to Foreman installer itself. So instead of supplying the full gamut of Puppet modules that we need, we only supply the additional ones for Katello and the capsule and things like this. And a scenario in this concept is basically an additional answer file that's distributed from Katello. So a scenario is able to modify existing Foreman answers. So for the Katello use case, we need to supply different paths for certificates. We need to turn on organizations and locations. And then on top of the Foreman settings we need to change, we also need to introduce our own Puppet module. So the scenario work needs to be done in KFO itself. There's a tracker specifically for the scenarios that is linked on the wiki page, if you were curious. So there's a number of issues that are around this. In order to do it today, upstream, Katello has this concept of a capsule. This needs to go away. The capsule needs to become more of a traditional Foreman proxy. This means the Foreman proxy modules need to be moved to the top level of the installer, and what's in capsule that's Katello specific today needs to be renamed to indicate its new purpose, something like content specific. So the scenarios is really the foundation of the effort. So if a user has an existing Foreman, they'll be able to install Katello installer, run Katello installer. We'll keep all of the existing answer choices they've made. The only thing that we're going to be doing in this case is adding the Katello bits on top. In addition to solving converting the installer to being a scenario, we have to deal with the issue of certificates. So this is probably the most complicated out of all the tasks that we have to address as part of installing Katello in existing Foreman. So in the wiki page, you'll see there's a link to the Puppet Certs module, which will give you an overview of all the various different certificates that are involved in Katello. So you can see the list is actually quite extensive. So what we've decided to do as as part of this feature is to walk away from the Katello search tool and rely more on a Puppet-based approach. So this is going to involve using a module called Puppet OpenSSL. It's going to need some modifications to support some things that we need regarding certificate authorities. So there's some effort around that. And also converting the existing Katello installs who are using Katello Search Tool to a format that works with Puppet OpenSSL. So the idea behind this is that when you install Katello fresh or you want to use your own certificates, you still can. If you're using an existing Foreman installation, we have the ability to take the Puppet CA. So in a traditional Foreman install, the Puppet CA is actually the certificate authority for everything. So the web UI, the smart proxies, and the clients themselves all use the Puppet CA. Katello does things a little bit differently. We don't rely on the Puppet CA at all. We generate our own through Katello Search Tool, and this becomes the CA for Candlepin. It's what we use for the web UI. It's what the smart proxies use, and it's what clients use. There still exists a Puppet CA. However, it's only used for the Puppet communication only. So as part of this feature, this will change. You'll have the ability to use an existing Puppet CA. So what we'll do is we'll do chain certificates. So the Puppet CA could be the root CA, which would sign the Katello one. This is probably the most complicated part of this feature. I think that out of the breakdown of stories and time allocation, this is probably about 40% of it. There's still a lot of things that need to be decided out of this, especially negotiated with Foreman, in what parts of this can become part of the existing Foreman installer today, and what parts we have to manage from Katello. The other issues that we have to address is backend. So Katello has Pulp, Candlepin, and Elasticsearch. When you're looking at all the objects that exist in Foreman, organizations, users, these kinds of things, they need to be created in the backend systems as well. So if you're coming from an existing Foreman installation, you may already have your own organizations and locations. You clearly already have your own users. So what we need to do is change the way that Katello does this. So instead of doing this when the objects are created, we need to make sure that the seeds handle this. So when you run break seed, we'll also go through all the existing options and make sure that all the existing objects and make sure they sync up. Make sure they sync up with what's in Foreman and the backend systems as well. So for databases, Katello, since its beginning, has only ever supported Postgres. But a lot of Foreman users that are out there are using MySQL. So we investigated the possibility of using MySQL as a supported backend for Katello. I actually tried this out, and we get pretty far along in the migration. For all of the Rails migrations we have, I think it's not in this wiki page, but they don't start failing until the middle of 2014 or so. So there's probably not many migrations to fix for using in the installer. So supporting MySQL with Katello is quite possible, and Candlepin theoretically already claims support with MySQL, which still needs to be tested. So this is something that we can definitely support. And then the last topic that we needed to address was capsules, which I already hinted at, is that currently Katello has its own concept of this capsule. So what we had basically decided is that a Katello capsule is really just a Foreman proxy. So this means in the installer, the Foreman proxy module gets moved to the top. And any Katello functions that are in the capsule today should either get moved to Foreman proxy directly through the plugins feature, like Foreman proxy already supports, or through our own content-specific module, which basically means stripping down Puppet capsule and removing all the Foreman proxy bits, making it only handle the capsule. So the tracker for this issue is in red line. You can view the list of stories that we have, as well as the number of um, uh, story points that we've assigned. The total amount of story points works out to be something like 6 developer sprints for the whole thing. I don't know if that is optimistic or pessimistic. Part of this is still a lot of undefined, similar to the identification feature. So there's still some things that need to be worked out in terms of level of effort. So my own expectation would be that this doesn't make Katello 2.3, but we're looking more like Katello 2.4. But it really depends how fast things move and what kind of resources we get. So that's really it. That's the summary of how we plan to get Katello installed in the existing Foreman. I'll make sure the wiki link gets added to the YouTube video later. We have some time for questions if there's any. If you're using the viewer link, there's a question box on the right. So Yvonne had a comment. He would like to avoid Katello maintaining its own tool for certificates. It should be part of the Foreman installers, and others should benefit as well. Also, in the light of other configuration management tools, ability to install without puppet is nice. Yeah, so there's an open issue about this. So, for example, if you try to install Foreman today with --no enable puppet, it totally breaks the installer. So this would be an opportunity to use scenario for certificates. But yeah, whatever solution we end up having this puppet OpenSSL, it's up to Foreman to decide if that's something they want to include in their code base. But that is something that we would certainly prefer to maintain on the Foreman side of things and not make it Katello specific. David Kaplan asks, will the convergence lead to a single instance of the DB, MySQL, or Postgres? The user will have a choice, just like they do with Foreman today. Postgres, I think, will always remain the default, but if you want to use an existing MySQL instance, you can pass those settings to the installer and make it use MySQL. So it's user choice. All right, so unless there is no more question, to wrap this up, I'll make sure the links for the things that I talked about show up in the YouTube video. And if you have any other questions, you can ask me on IRC or on the mailing list. All right, thanks all. Have a good day.